Chapter 23. What about all those unfortunates who don't get to choose? I wrote this title before I had figured out the problem. Even now I don't have it figured out. I think we can find an answer in the scaffolding we've established in this book. If you were to shut out all media full stop, your focus would automatically shrink to your immediate universe. We have been indoctrinated to believe it is a virtue to be informed. Many feel guilt for feeling uninformed of current events. But why? Is it really an immoral act to solely direct attention to one's sensorial universe? I wouldn't give a hermit in a monastery a hard time about it. Maybe what we're actually responsible for is to make the sensory universe we actually have the power to control as good as it can be. Peering into the internet crystal can give one a deluded idea that we could or should do something about suffering we see well beyond our sphere of influence. It's this kind of attention that causes so many Americans to obsess over the pageantry of presidential politics while neglecting their own backyards. It can also make one feel responsible for wrongdoing one state does in their name. Very few people do have this kind of reach and influence. Most of us don't. We should focus on visceral change for the better we are actually capable of making. When you see someone suffering in your path, help them. When you see someone suffering in media, well, there's many questions to ask, and you must consult your Truth Cypher. Suffering in media is often used to direct one's energy toward a specific consensus reality conclusion. There were many images of people suffering in the Syrian city of Aleppo in 2016. Mainstream media focused on convincing Americans that Syrian President Bashar Assad was an evil, ruthless dictator that needed to be eliminated. Even if one did not study the dubious provenance of these images or the wild contradictions of allying with terrorists to depose a democratically elected leader, the effect of going to war because Assad is bad should be enough for anyone with a moral character to pause. From that pause, we can follow the trail back and short-circuit media that aims to justify immoral actions. With the Truth Cypher, we can at least disengage from bad realities, even if we don't have the time or energy to debunk them. So that's the end of that chapter. I think, I guess, let's see, what could I say about that? I feel like I said a lot about it in the writing of that. The Syrian debacle is sort of receding into the background a little bit, so it almost doesn't seem that relevant right now. But of course it's relevant because it's something many of us live through, just the outright propaganda. It's not, even though it's been sort of, even though it's, people are, it's sort of fading in the background. Sometimes you'll hear some of those mainstream outlets sort of saying, trying to echo those talking points that are wildly out of date anyway. But I think this is about hijacking the goodwill of people. Like, I titled it, "What about all those unfortunates who don't get to choose?" And I think that's more about weaponized humanitarianism, and that has been a pretty effective way to hijack consensus reality. Because if you remember, or maybe you don't remember, but last year regarding Aleppo, we were just being pumped with like terrible images of Aleppo. It's like, oh my goodness, the Russians are doing, they're bombing this place, and it's just, it's a crisis. We have to intervene. We have to bomb this country to save this country. Like it was pretty easy to see through if you actually were aware of more diverse media sources. Like you could actually make an informed judgment that we should do nothing, because it's not our place to do anything. When I say we, I'm talking about the country. But, I had so many arguments with, well-meaning liberals about this. Like everyone was just gung-ho to save Aleppo and whatnot. They didn't sort of understand that, saving Aleppo meant allying with ISIS, which is supposed to be the big boogeyman. So many contradictions. The whole thing was just breaking down. Like it was just serious propaganda. You could see, like, in the media manipulation, the people on the ground in Aleppo that were begging for help were always the same people. So you could surmise that these are, clandestine operatives. There was just very strange. There was like an African American person living in Syria, looking for help, and that seems a little strange. That's not what you would normally see in Syria, as far as I know. I've never been there. I don't really know, but that didn't make sense. And you would just always see the same people. It was that's who the media was pushing. So that was like a clue that this is an operation. This is a psychological operation to hijack consensus. Because it's this sort of maybe this applies more to Americans. It's like we are told that we are the stewards of the world and we have to save the world. And so that's a good will. It's like, okay, we're so prosperous and we're so strong. We have to spread democracy is, instead of spreading good, it's democracy is good. It's there's a whole scaffolding to argue. You have to just sort of assume that that's a correct view. And most people probably don't really know what it means. It's arguable if we even have a democracy in America, if it really means all that much. But this idea that that's our mission, to save people we don't know that didn't ask for our help, and that's key. I mean, I think they were trying to demonstrate that people on the ground in Aleppo and Syria were begging for our help. But if you followed alternative media sources, you would see that you would find just the opposite, and people cursing America because it was actually ISIS and ISIS dropping and all these so-called rebels, doing the most brutal terrorizing of these people. So just to show that there were multiple realities competing for one another. And it was one of those. It was like the one issue where I most agreed with Trump on that. Why would we ally with ISIS? Never mind that Trump is not going to say well, maybe he did say that Obama created ISIS, which is you could say there. You could argue that with some scaffolding too. Nothing is that straightforward, but I think he probably outright said that. So that was for me that that wouldn't get my vote. I didn't vote for anybody who was anybody who I could have blood on my hands by proxy. I was not going to vote for. So that's the problem with voting. You give it's like giving up your consensus, distributing the guilt. Obviously Trump is drone bombing and doing all sorts of things anyway. He's changed the focus. I think he's allied with Saudi Arabia. In their war on Yemen, seems like something was going on with Lebanon. I mean, it's that operation didn't work for whatever reason. Probably just factions, deep state factions wanting different things. None of these are good people. But for that one issue, I was able to, I could say that Trump got it right, at least in what he spoke. And maybe it matters a little bit because we didn't actually send a full ground operation into Syria, so I think it matters a lot. I think it is a big deal, but it's probably there's some theater to it. Like, you can't know anything that's true if you trust the media. Just an aside point on the reporting in Syria, there were no Western journalists, there were no mainstream Western journalists on the ground in Syria. All the news was coming from the Pentagon, the military. All the news was coming from the military. So that's just a complete psychological operation. Nobody knows what's going on. They just trust the state. For me at this point, the burden of proof on an event that the media is happening, they have to prove to me the event happened. Because when I use the Truth Cypher, they'll tell me an event happened, like say a mass shooting or a terrorist event, and then there's always coupled with it like this is what we should do about the event, and what we should do about it is always a transgression of our freedom. Like we need to give up a little more so we can be a little more safe, or we need to give up our tax money or whatever it is. So for me, it's, I've actually been having some Twitter. I've been trying to drop some Twitter truth on some of the vocal, more conservative-leaning people, because I can see them getting trolled by the media all the time. Maybe this is a bit of an aside, but it's like, okay, like let's talk about Jordan Peterson, Paul Joseph Watson, Stefan Molyneux. I kind of agree with them on a lot of things, but in a way, like when, let's say they drop this sort of, there was an article about some guy who decided he's a Filipino woman, a white guy. In reality, in your sensory reality, who cares, right? But these guys always take the bait. They always share the article, like as if to show that this is where society is collapsing to. I'm not saying that's not indicative of anything, but I am saying it's all framing. If you are an editor of a newspaper and you could literally just say, I want to write an article about a white person who thinks they're an Asian woman. So that's where the concept originated from. In a world of 7 billion, 8 billion people, you're going to find whatever you want. So but it really doesn't matter that these people are out there. But what happens is they decide what they want to write about. They find the anomaly. They blow up the anomaly. And then on cue, Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux and Paul Joseph Watson, Ben Shapiro, they all freak out, share the article as if it's indicative of anything at all. It's certainly indicative of a corrupted media. That's actually what I'm saying. But I'm saying that it doesn't actually mean anything. It just means something because of this sort of dialectic of, the corrupt media wanted to put this idea, this obscure idea into the culture, and the troll worked because the more conservative-leaning people amplify it because they're like, look where we are. We must fight against this. Meanwhile, in reality, this doesn't really matter at all. But this is how you create. This is how you create reality in the mind space. Like if everybody let's say that you have a corrupt media that wants to put those, these sort of laughable ideas into the culture, but all the conservative folks just ignored it. The story would just die on the vine, right? It didn't troll anybody. It takes. I'm just saying it's a dialectic that takes two, and you can kind of see how it works. That's a major digression from what we were talking about in this chapter, but I guess that's just what I was dealing with on Twitter the other day, and just an example of how the mind space of reality is completely hijacked, and how you could play into it if you don't really. If you go too far in the conservative vein, you're going to play right into it. I can see, I'm kind of surprised that people as smart as Jordan Peterson can't see that they're being trolled. They're actually feeding these stories, but that's just they have their own universe that they're contending with, and it's providing the proofs to them that they need, that's motivating them to act. So that's just an observation I had. I don't know what Paul Joseph Watson would do without those articles either. So like these people actually exist on these things. If they actually won the battle that they think they're fighting, they actually don't exist anymore either. So I don't know about that. I wouldn't ascribe that to Jordan Peterson, but I would say Paul Joseph Watson, his career is based on these troll stories. You can look at Vice, and they're literally just, it looks like they're making up news in that vein of just the most ludicrous, depraved section of humanity. And I'm saying it could be a hoax, could be fake news, but it also could just be framing, because there's so many universes that you don't have to fake. You probably don't have to fake anything, although it seems like they do fake things. But in the regard of the social, everyone is so eclectic that you'll find something pretty strange, and you can blow it up, and you can make you can make people think there's something going on. Which there is always something going on, but to the degree which we should care, that's what's being hijacked. So I'm going to check out. I'm going to stop for now. I think just 2 or 3 more chapters left, and then we can get into launching the podcast.